Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to be looking at kind of sensitive, right?
Hmm.
How society views promiscuity. And in particular, this idea that it's cool,
Right.
but, you know,
Yeah.
we're not here to like judge anyone or tell anyone what they should or shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely.
We're really just here
Yeah.
to unpack some of this stuff you sent over
Yeah.
and explore what the psychological effects might be, good and
Exactly.
bad,
Yeah.
when you buy into this idea
Yeah.
that promiscuity equals cool.
And it's interesting because this excerpt, it doesn't actually say that having sex is a bad thing.
Oh.
It's more about like the pressure to conform to this narrative that can really mess with people.
Interesting.
Like make them go against their
Yeah,
own
man.
values or what they're actually comfortable with.
You know, it's almost like that pressure to drink in college.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't really want to,
Oh, yeah.
just because it seemed like what everyone was doing.
Exactly.
You wanted to fit in. Cool, right?
Yeah. It's such a good parallel because when that seeps into something, as personal as your sexuality, that can have some pretty serious consequences.
There's this phrase in here that I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
Erosion of authentic self-worth. Like, what does that even mean?
So it's like this. If you're always looking outward for approval for your sexual activity, it can actually start to take the place of your own self-worth.
Hmm.
You become dependent on other people's opinions and start to feel bad about yourself if you don't live up to their expectations.
So instead of feeling good about yourself
Mm.
because of your own values or talents, you're basing your self-worth on how many people you've slept with or how much attention you're getting for your sexual experiences.
Precisely.
Right.
And that's a pretty shaky foundation for your self-esteem
Yeah.
because it's totally external. You can't control it.
It reminds me of that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
If you're not taking care of yourself and you don't actually value yourself,
Uh-huh.
how are you going to have healthy relationships?
Right.
It just doesn't work. It doesn't.
That kind of brings us to another point, right?
Yes.
This potential for emotional burnout when we treat casual sex. Like it's just another trend.
It can be so draining.
Like even if you're having all these encounters, you might not be feeling any real connection.
Yeah, a lot of people find they don't experience any real intimacy.
It's like the excitement of being cool
Yeah.
wears off.
Yeah.
And you end up feeling more disconnected than ever before.
You got it. It's such an important reminder that we need to be taking care of ourselves and not getting so caught up in what other people think.
Definitely. You know, and it makes me think about how often we see this narrative,
Mm-hmm.
like in movies and TV.
Mm-hmm.
The characters who are sleeping around, they're always portrayed as confident and desirable,
Mm-hmm.
and they just seem so carefree.
Right. And that can absolutely affect how we see ourselves and our own experiences.
Yeah.
We might start to think we need to act a certain way or have this certain number of partners to be considered cool or worthy.
It's like setting up these expectations
Yeah.
that are impossible to meet,
Got
especially for young people
Absolutely.
who are still trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, it's why I think it's so important to have these honest conversations, to challenge these narratives and promote a more balanced and nuanced understanding of all this.
So instead of just accepting what we're told is cool,
Mm-hmm.
we need to encourage people to think critically
Mm-hmm.
and reflect on their own values.
Exactly. Like ask yourself, what are your values? What are you comfortable with? What kind of relationships do you actually want?
It's about understanding
Yeah.
that true coolness comes from being authentic,
Yes.
not conforming to some standard that someone else set.
I couldn't agree more. It's about owning your choices and making sure your life feels genuine and fulfilling, no matter what anyone else thinks.
You know, this excerpt also points out
Mm.
that buying into this whole promiscuity is cool thing
Yeah.
can actually make people afraid of commitment.
Oh, yeah, totally. It makes sense if you think about it. When you're constantly being told that casual hookups are exciting and liberating, commitment starts to seem, kind of boring, restrictive even.
Like the opposite of cool.
Exactly. And it can make it so hard to build those deeper, more meaningful relationships that I think a lot of people actually crave.
So you're saying like this constant focus on casual encounters
Yeah.
almost trains people to like put instant gratification first
Yeah.
over the possibility of something more lasting.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's like you're always chasing that next high
Yeah.
instead of appreciating, the subtle beauty of a long-term connection.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say like Not everyone wants a long-term commitment.
Right, of course.
And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But it becomes a problem when you feel this pressure to avoid it.
Yeah.
Just because it doesn't fit this image of being cool.
It has to be about having that freedom to choose what you actually want without being judged.
Without feeling that pressure from society.
Exactly. Speaking of society, this excerpt also brings up how this whole coolness equation can fuel things like anxiety and social comparison.
Oh, yeah. It's like everyone's a sudden expert on everyone else's sex life.
Yeah.
And it creates this weird competition to see who's the most experienced or the most adventurous.
You're always trying to prove your worth based on this made-up standard.
And that's got to be really damaging.
It is. It can be incredibly damaging to your self-esteem.
Because you're constantly, like, comparing yourself to others and feeling like you're not good enough.
Exactly. And, you know, a lot of these comparisons are based on distorted stories anyway. Like, people might exaggerate their experiences or downplay their insecurities just to fit in with that cool crowd.
It's like social media, but worse.
Yeah.
Everyone's presenting this perfect version of themselves, making it impossible to feel secure in your own skin.
It's more than just feeling insecure, though. This excerpt talks about the possibility of psychological trauma, too.
Wait, trauma? How does that even fit into all this?
Well, if you engage in sexual activity without being emotionally ready or without, like, taking precautions to make sure everyone is safe, that increases the risk of negative experiences, even traumatic events.
Like feeling pressured, used, violated.
Exactly. And those experiences, they can have a lasting impact on your mental and emotional well-being.
It's a good reminder, I think, that sex should always feel safe, consensual, and respectful.
Absolutely.
So how do we even start to break free from all this pressure to be cool? How do we start having healthier, more authentic conversations about sex? Because this narrative feels like it's everywhere.
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. This excerpt actually has some really great recommendations. It starts with education.
You mean like comprehensive sex ed? That goes beyond just the basic biology.
Yes. We need to be having these open and honest conversations about consent, boundaries, healthy relationships, and the emotional and psychological parts of sex.
So we can teach young people how to navigate their sexuality safely.
Yeah.
In a way that feels empowering, aligned with their own values.
And it's not just about young people. I think adults can benefit from these conversations, too.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of us, you know, grew up with this limited information about sex.
Yeah.
Might still be carrying around these misconceptions or insecurities.
So it's about unlearning those old narratives and creating a space for these more honest and nuanced discussions.
And that includes challenging those gender stereotypes that often get tied in with promiscuity.
Oh, for sure. Things like the double standard that says it's cool for men to sleep around, but if women do the same thing, they're judged. It's so harmful because it creates this narrow and limiting view of what it means to be masculine or feminine.
And it can keep this cycle going of shame and guilt, especially for women.
Absolutely. It's like we're stuck in this loop where these outdated beliefs shape how we see ourselves and each other. And then those views just reinforce the stereotypes.
So how do we break free?
I think it starts with awareness, recognizing these stereotypes exist and knowing that they're not based in reality.
And then what? Do we just call them out every time we see them?
That's definitely part of it. But we also need to actively promote more positive, more inclusive representations of sexuality.
You mean like in the media, in schools, in our everyday conversations?
Exactly. We need to create a culture where people feel safe to express their sexuality in a way that feels authentic to them without worrying about judgment or shame.
So instead of focusing on what's cool or not cool, we need to focus on what's healthy and respectful and empowering.
Absolutely. That includes, you know, prioritizing consent, open communication, emotional well-being in all our relationships.
Wow, it's like we're talking about this huge shift in perspective. Instead of just like letting society tell us what to do, we're taking back control and defining things on our own terms.
Yes, and the shift, it needs to go beyond just our individual attitudes, right? We need to look at like the bigger systems, the factors that contribute to this whole promiscuity is cool thing. Like you're talking about how the media portrays sex in a way that like reinforces all these stereotypes.
Exactly. You see it all the time. Movies and TV, they link a character's coolness with their sexual conquests.
It's like a formula. And it's not just the media either, right?
There are whole industries built around these ideas. They profit off our insecurities and make us feel like we need to buy certain things or
Mm.
act certain ways, to be
It's
accepting.
a complex system for sure. It's going to take some serious work to dismantle it.
But it all starts with awareness.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Once you see these influences, you can start making better choices.
So we've talked about the potential downsides, like
Yeah.
eroding your self-worth, emotional burnout,
Right.
even trauma.
We've talked about the importance of promoting good sex ed, fostering self-awareness, and challenging those stereotypes that are everywhere.
Recognizing that true coolness, it comes from living authentically.
Yeah. Making choices that match your values, no matter what society tells you.
And you have the power,
You
right?
do. You get to decide what cool means to you. Don't let anyone else define that for you.
It's like we've been sold this version of cool, that's element, like
Mm.
totally superficial
Mm.
and ultimately unfulfilling. But there's a deeper kind of cool that comes from self-acceptance and self-respect and making choices that truly align with your values.
Beautifully said. It's about embracing who you are and celebrating the fact that everyone's journey is different.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I hope our listeners are feeling empowered, like they have the courage to challenge these narratives that try to limit them.
And just remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many people questioning these norms
Wow.
and creating space for these more honest conversations about sex and relationships.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration. It's been a really insightful conversation.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time.
Stay curious and keep those conversations going.